Welcome back one and all to another exciting and probably very long edition of Transformers Reviews. And the reason for that today, everybody, is because we are taking a look at this boy right here, the R.I.D. 2001 version of Optimus Prime and his brother Ultra Magnus. With that being out of the way, let's get started with the red fire truck man himself. So here we can see the figure from 20-something years ago up against his modern incarnation. And I think for the most part, yeah, I mean, it's doing what it's supposed to do as the Haslab, basically just being a very nice upgrade of the original guy. Now, one of the small details that I do appreciate, that on both iterations in Japanese, they have fire department with the English Cybertron underneath it. So the Cybertron fire department. Okay. And aside from that, this figure over here, he had a lot of spring-loaded features. One of those being that if you go ahead and pull on this red trigger right here, it will spring-load fire the water cannons. Now, because there aren't any spring features on the new guy, you can go ahead and just manually pull them out. Now, whereas these were both static on this guy, you can see that over here, these water cannons have a little bit more mobility and you can kind of go ahead and maneuver them where you want them. Now, the one thing about this is they are not blast effect compatible, which I was a little bit disappointed on. Ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal, but it feels like it would have made a lot of sense to do that on this Haslab guy. And let me go ahead and address some of the issues with this figure. Now, if you can see the difference from the gray right here to the kind of yellowish effect, that's not smoke damage. This boy's never been around that. That is actually sun damage, plus the fact that this figure is over 20 years old. That's just a little disclaimer I'm throwing out there. The other thing is, because on these guys, they used a form of rubber tires, and you can see that over here on this wheel, it's actually split. And it's also the same sort of ordeal over here on this tire. Basically, there was a seam there that kept this rubber like tighter around this rim, but over the decades, that seam actually deteriorated, leading to the split tire. On the new boy, they're actually just all plastic, so I don't have to worry about this thing 2 decades from now deteriorating like the original. However, if we go back to our old guy over here, another spring-loaded feature was if you push this button on the back of the ladder, it would cause all of his missiles to pop up at the same time. Now, over here with this guy, you actually have to do it manually, but you know, what are we, lazy? Come on, man, if you're gonna mess with the Transformer, if this is too much work, you have failed at enjoying your Transformers. However, there you can see that it is mimicking the old guy right there. Now, as is the tradition with Hasbro nowadays, anything that originally had a missile launching feature, for most of those figures, not all of them, but most of them, they actually have things that include areas where you can attach blast effects. So since he doesn't launch these missiles anymore, they've been reinterpreted more as laser cannons, hence the blasting effect that you see right here, which I'm actually okay with it being a different take on that basically ladder weaponry that they've got going on here. Now, if you guys will notice a little bit of a detail on Optimus Prime, here at the back, they have what looks like a command chair, which, you know, it's got some decent styling to it. But on this version of Optimus Prime, it was intended to work with Diaclone guys. The new version of Optimus likewise has the command chair, although it doesn't seem as nicely detailed. But if you look in the bottom, those pegs should look rather familiar. And one of the reasons it is upsized is because it includes another character from the show, that actually being Cerebros, which I feel there needs to be a little bit of explanation in regards to this version of Cerebros. Because in the original show, the smaller human-sized person was actually that of Spike Witwicky, which joined with Cerebros, that then became the head of Fortress Maximus. Now, Cerebros in the show was actually shown to be the same size as ones like Sideburn and his brothers. However, again, for this, they've gone ahead and went with a human-sized version of Cerebros to be the headmaster to somebody else. Also in the show, it showed Cerebros combining with the emissary that then became the head of Fortress Maximus. which we will get to eventually. Let's stick with our fire ladder thing we've got going on right now. So as we can see here, we can go ahead and attach Cerebros here at the back for him to operate the ladder. Now on the original guy, this ladder can extend, but it has an issue due to its age and design. So here we can see the ladder is extended, but if we try to raise it any higher, like that, it detaches from the back because of how this system is with basically just those two pegs right there. Okay, so here this Optimus Prime starting out pretty much the same as the old one that we saw, but if we raise his ladder, you can see that it is not causing it to detach from the back section because of the much improved system of how they have that going on. We can actually cause the ladder to turn in any direction and still has no issues with the main truck body of Optimus Prime. So while we've got Cerebros down here operating the ladder part of the truck, that does bring to attention the very tip end of it. Which, yeah, you could have him operating the water cannons back there down at the very bottom of the truck. But the other function that this thing has is that you can go ahead and fold it down, and now it's a rescue bucket with a space big enough to accommodate yet another Titan Master. And it was designed specifically for that feature. So not that you have your, Titan / Headmasters becoming firefighters, but I think it's just the fact that it's more of a niche feature that's a nice addition, and I'm glad that they did it, because they didn't have to go to this level, but I'm kind of glad that they did. Now, one thing that I do like on the old guy versus the new one is he had some pretty decently sized big Autobot symbols on his side, which, as you can see here on the new one, they're probably about a third a size of the original, which, okay, that's just a small detail, but it's a personal preference thing as well. Which I do have to go ahead and bring out the fact that on this new version, these detach way too easily, which, I mean, I guess for them not to be broken, that's a good thing, but it is kind of one of those deals that when you're fumbling around with this guy in robot mode, they just pop off. Like, there's like zero resistance to it. Anyway, okay, it's a small thing, but it's irritating to me. And of course, we had to show Optimus rolling with his posse that he usually does. So here we have the original 2001 Brawn. And while this is the Universe Inferno, this is also using the 2001 Prowl mold, which, ironically enough, with this being like the fire chief rescue vehicle, I think it goes really well with this Optimus Prime. Maybe even more than the standard police version, but that's just my personal preference. And then here we have probably a figure that I only halfway like, because let's face it, this is a Cyberverse vehicle version of like Sideburn, although they couldn't technically use the Dodge Viper because of licensing and stuff. Do the four of these and their collective good look excellent overall altogether? Well, definitively yes. I have to say that this Optimus Prime, yes, it does reinterpret some of the features of the original. This thing does feel like what it is, an improved version of his vehicle mode. Now, as we go along farther, we'll look at some of the other things and see if he kind of keeps up that track record there as well. Now, sometimes we would see Optimus's posse rolling with his brother. Sometimes it was by their choice. Initially, it was not. But this is generally the configuration that we would see the Autobot brothers in. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is we need to ask the question, can the new updated version of Ultra Magnus do this same setup? Well, the short answer is no, he cannot, at least with the classic figures. So for instance, if we go ahead and try to load X-Brawn on the bottom, like we saw with the other original Ultra Magnus, you can see that basically X-Brawn's back end up here sticks so far out, and he can't really go any farther forward, so that not even the liftgate will completely close all the way. However, we do have to ask, well, what about Prowl? Can he fit in there? And yeah, I mean, pretty much it's still kind of a tight fit, but at least the doors will come up on the back. Now, I am wondering kind of what about Prowl's modern day surrogate that we have in the form of Clampdown, which he's only good as a surrogate in vehicle mode. But let's just go ahead and see if he can fit in there. And yeah, I mean, with him probably being a modern figure and just the tiniest bit shorter than Inferno or Prowl over here, it works a lot better. Now, that also does bring up the question of what about Sideburn? So we go ahead, pull him in there. And he's kind of like, ironically, the more original Prowl mold, that he's pretty long. And again, it's just because of the molding of Ultra Magnus's jetpack bit right here that prevents them from going any farther in. So the best one that I've seen so far is Clampdown. So we'll go ahead and put him down there. So even with this just very slightly modified layout, I think that these boys look really, really good. I love how especially Sideburn and Clampdown's colors tie in just so perfectly with the white and the blue of Ultra Magnus, and he just looks so crisp. So here we can see Ultra Magnus and Ultra Magnus, and I have to say that just like Optimus Prime, this boy unfortunately did get some sun damage. The other area that really kind of disturbs me is seeing how faded and worn away the blue chrome bits are on this. I mean, there's still a little bit of it there. I'm glad that our new boy is crispy and white. He's got a very strong blue giant bumper on him. That's really cool. And like we've seen with these boys, whether it's older or newer figures, Magnus looks really good hauling these guys. Now, one thing that I've always dug on the original Ultra Magnus is how he has these rather kind of just blatant machine guns peeking out over his bumper. And they are on the new Ultra Magnus as well, but you can see that they're a lot smaller and a lot more subdued, which I was a little bit disappointed in. So chalk one up for the old guy as well. Now sometimes Ultra Magnus would show up just rocking this giant weapons pack on the back of his vehicle mode, sometimes on the front, sometimes with the machine gun being on the right side of his vehicle mode, and then at other times he would just have it on the left side of his vehicle mode. You know, just basically whatever Ultra Magnus was feeling like that day. Can our new Ultra Magnus match this level of swag? Well, yes, as long as it's in the front and mounted this way right here. Now the reason for that is that you can see these pegs that are on both sides of the front part of his truck mode. It's the same way that this original gun mounts, but with this one you can see how far apart the pegs are. If you swap these bits where the machine gun bit is over here on what will become the left side of Ultra Magnus's truck mode, these pegs will be too close in and they won't be far enough apart to sit right there on the front. So we can go ahead and match up the peg holes right there and right there. And here he is matching the look on the front. Now, the original Ultra Magnus used pegs on the back to move his cannons to the back side when he wanted to do that. Now, as this Ultra Magnus does not have those, but he does have the 5mm peg ports. They have now astoundingly retconned that Ultra Magnus has a female target master that he runs around with. This version of Blue Bolts is not just a weapons pack. Due to her weaponizer nature, you kinda can move his cannons to the back side. So as far as just having the cannons on the back, you can go ahead and have them either way. I just went ahead and put the big laser cannon over here, but you kind of have to figure out what to do with this, which you had to line up the pegs on the bottom side of this gray bit to line up, and to do that you had to pull the legs kind of out away from the body. So with all the weaponry that we've got, how it's laid out on Ultra Magnus, I feel this is a lot cleaner looking as opposed to the original version, which it just kind of feels like it's all just clumped up in one area. But I like it whenever you can kind of fill out the vehicle mode a little bit more evenly. Now, much like we talked about with Optimus Prime, having his missile firing features reinterpreted as laser cannons, we can see the same thing with Ultra Magnus here, which I personally like myself. Now, something interesting about these two missiles is the fact that if you guys saw some of the live streams, these were actually kind of a last-minute addition. If you still wanted to use these as missiles, go ahead and load up the blast effect right here. And then because this is just a 5mm peg, you could actually go ahead and plug it into the blast effect And for photography and stuff, it still looks like it is a missile being launched at like the original guy over here. Now, with her being a weaponizer, you can of course do crazy things that you probably expect. One of those that surprised me was you can actually go ahead and remove bits like this, and because it is just operating on the system we've been working on since Siege, you can go ahead and plug in other weapons if you wanted to swap out theirs. So it is just kind of amusing in the long run. Speaking of Siege, if you want blue bolts to give somebody like Clampdown that insane amount of firepower, well, as you can see, she can clearly do that. I think the thing that I like most is how this cannon just goes along the length of his arm, and I mean, it's mounted up here, so that's more Galvatron, but it also kind of has like a Megatron feel with it just being a arm-mounted cannon. Although I do like how this all is a little bit cleaner, nothing scratched up. That is a definite improvement over Siege. So here we are back in robot mode, and I think that on our robot mode, it's also really cool design overall, aside from the feet. But also I like how she does scale, being taller than Clampdown, but yet she's not as tall as the dude on her left. So when we look at these boys here, one of the interesting things about this version of Cerebros was literally there was a room that detached from Fortress Maximus that transformed into a body that they called the Emissary that he would then combine with. Which, as we know originally, this bot was Cerebros, with this being Spike. But yeah, I think as like a modern update, if you have either one like this KO version, or if you even wanted to put him on here, that Headmaster would look good. So if you have that version of Titan's Return Fortress Maximus, this is basically what it would look like if you go ahead and slap that modern Cerebros on there. Now, I do have to say that in the show, this black and red color scheme was more appropriate, but I think that with all the paint hits and everything that this official one has, it looks pretty good. These legs are actually different from the stock version. This is the upgraded legs that my friend put on here. But even with those, I mean, I'm just kind of digging the modern update of this guy right here, because at the end of the show, he was pretty much the main focus. And with that being said, guys, why don't we actually now turn our attention back to Optimus Prime? Okay, so we have finally reached this mode with our boy, one of his first robot modes. So here in the base form of his robot mode, there are some things about this that I really don't like. So let's go ahead and rip the band-aid off. And I'm sorry, because probably once you see this, you will not be able to unsee it. The details of this boy, the lower half of his body, it's too big in comparison to his top half. The reason is you can see where his abdomen ends down here. Well, his waist is too wide. It doesn't line up. It's very disproportionate. You can see over here on the original 2001 version, this is actually very screen accurate. They gave proper discipline to this guy's design. The Haslab, unfortunately, does not. But I do want to go ahead and compliment this thing on the fact that the detail of the lower legs and everything about it aesthetically is fine. Again, it's just the size of it appears wrong. Now, granted, that is to help fill out not only his super robot mode, but the focus of this set, of course, being Omega Prime. But again, this is what we see him in most of the time, and a lot of the details, like the chest, are wrong. So for instance, again, this, not counting the vac metal on here, but just the sculpting and the general design, again, this 2001 version is animation accurate. Over here we can see that the boob windows are way too far apart. And then for the ab design, it's like they squished it, stretched it out, and said, let's just kind of fuss around with the shapes here. Again, this is nice, tight, and clean with the entirety of the torso, and this really feels messy. All right, well, what is a positive? Well, as you can see on our boy here, he actually has his hands that have extended beyond the armor guards. Now, this over here on the old one, that is something that is wrong about him, is basically his hands could not extend beyond these pieces of the truck mode right here. Plus the fact that his whites are white and he doesn't have 20 years of sun damage on him, so we'll give him that as well. Now, there is a thing about the head. I mean, it had some angles, but it was more of this kind of sweeping curve design. Whereas with the Haslab guy, you can kind of see that they've taken some of those sweeping curves and stylized it. Now, because it is personal preference, that's one thing that I don't mind them changing from the original. It kind of gives this guy a little bit more of a serious flair. And depending upon the light, you can see that they went ahead and added that back metal bronze color to his eyes, which is really awesome. I'm digging that. Another thing that is a small little detail is you can see here on his back, the blaze blasters actually have the sirens molded in there. And despite them popping off, I'm actually appreciative of the fact that they went to that level. Whereas on the old guys, you can see that they're just basically those simple pieces of plastic with no sculpting detail in them whatsoever. So one thing I want to mention about this first stage version of his robot mode is that you can see obviously his blaster pistol is Blast Effects compatible. Despite whatever little small beefs with it that I might have, at least it does look cool with the blast effect. Now, you all knew that we were going to have to do this comparison at some point, and this is very not accurate to the scale because Optimus and Megatron in this robot mode are about on par with each other, and you can see that the new Haslab guy is a full head taller. So basically that justifies why we need to have Gigatron or Megatron over here have his Commander class upgrade, just so that it gives them the height. For this version of Optimus in this mode, again, needs to be eye level with Megatron. And welcome back to the channel from not so long ago, our original version of Sky-Byte. Now in this boy's video, we did mention that he needed to be eye level with Optimus as well, considering there was that one episode that they portrayed them as that, but also considering the animation kind of waffles a little bit, and he is shown being shorter than Megatron. I think that as long as maybe the new Age of the Primes version, if he sticks roughly within the same scale, like same height as at least Scourge, I think that would be show accurate, which we know is a big thing for these guys, but Omega Prime kind of blows it in some aspects. However, it is a waiting game and we will see. And speaking of the black tanker truck, here we can see this boy that, granted, maybe a couple years down the line we'll get a Scourge that can, you know, level peg with this guy, but for right now, this is the best we got. I mean, it's very disappointing, to be honest. Anyway, it's kind of whatever your personal preference is. Moving on. However, again, working within the logic of the show, if him and Sky-Byte were the same size and Sky-Byte was shown to be shorter than Megatron, then I guess you could work the logic around that way. Although there is an episode where these two boys are going at it. I believe it was outside of a dam, and they're shown to be eye to eye. And R.I.D. did maintain somewhat of a better notion of it, but again, that's proof that it wasn't 100% across the board. Now moving on to some of the features of his armor. There are certain episodes of the show in which Optimus Prime's Super Robot Mode fist attaches to him with nothing else. It's just like the super big fist. And there's a lot of things about this that I've always liked. The fact that the Super Mode had like these wrist blasters on it. I mean, that's a feature on the original, which ultimately play a role in base mode later for both of these guys. You know, if you thought any iteration of this mold was nuts with the shoulder mounted missile launchers, well then you ain't seen nothing till these boys rocked up on the scene. I've always thought these gigantic missile launcher shoulders were absolutely ridiculous. But you know what? Because of that, that's why I like it so much. This whole missile launcher is squashed and a little bit wider on the original boy, where they are a little bit beefier over here on the Haslab guy. However, I don't feel it's as clean looking because you do have the bits that become his Super Robot Mode shins kind of peeking through there. But again, one of those things about this guy that is absolutely crazy. But I mean, I just totally dig that they kept it for this Haslab guy, which I mean, you would kind of expect that, to be honest. And of course we had to show Optimus off with his boys. But again, do the four of these boys overall look good together? Absolutely yes. Now, Optimus Primes in general are known for opening up their chest and revealing the Matrix, either passing it on to somebody else or using it to cure a hate plague. But this Optimus Prime said, nah, I'm gonna do things a little bit different to separate me from all the other boys. So if we go ahead and flip him around to the back and pull these lights down like this, we can see that he does have the Matrix of Leadership residing in this cavity, again, on his backside. Now here you can go ahead and see his version of the Matrix, which it is very dynamically different as opposed to any other Matrix that we've seen before. We'll look a little bit more at this into Super Robot mode here coming up, which answers a question about this Optimus Prime that I've always had, is because on the old figure, the Matrix was just molded into his Super Robot mode's armor. And I always wondered, well, does he only have the Matrix whenever he was in that mode as opposed to this one? And the Haslab basically just answered my question and said, nope, he has the Matrix in this mode as well. So here we have Optimus's base mode made out of his Super Robot mode bits. And basically, this is just so you guys can see a overview of it. However, our main focus will be down here in just a moment, but just for this shot, I wanted you to see how it looked all together, and also in comparison to the original over here. Now, when we focus on this area, one thing that I do want to go ahead and mention is that the original actually had you put the Super Robot mode hands downward like this, whereas the new ones actually want you to put the hands in a position like this because of the what look like gun tip barrels on the ends of the fingertips. That's like basically just adding additional armament. And then when we look at the old figure, these guns can actually swivel on the old guy, and they can do the same thing on the new figure, but in addition to that, you can actually angle the barrels up, so if you want them kind of pointing like they're taking enemies coming this direction and that direction, you can now do that. Another thing that you might notice is that you do have on both versions of Optimus the antennae that also double as laser cannons, so that is a thing. Now, a unique feature to the old guy is the fact that if you wanted to add Optimus's compression pistol as part of this overall base setup, it actually gave you a dedicated place to slot it in, whereas on the new Haslab figure, that's not actually a thing. Now, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and use the Titan Master to go ahead and sit in the command chair like we saw earlier in vehicle mode, maybe pretending like he's actually operating these armaments. This doesn't do a tremendous job updating it, but it does feel a little bit sturdier than the original, so I'm gonna give it that credit at least. So we will go ahead and move on to Ultra Magnus next, but before we did, I wanted to just show you how he looks in comparison to a leader class, the Fallen. And I'm really saying that I don't think Megatron as Prime is as scary whenever this version of Optimus Prime just totally dominates him. And so here we have Ultra Magnus in his robot mode, and I just dig how he looks on his display stand, especially whenever we get around here to the back and how you can use the blast effects for the rockets. That's really cool. How it's used in conjunction with all the different pieces of blue bolts. With this weaponizer, you can see how sick it looks, because this is something that the old Ultra Magnus couldn't do, was have this rocket sort of, or well, this sort of weapon pack assembly that could have the barrels that could fire on both sides of his head. That looks absolutely awesome, and I'm totally digging it. Oh, and one other thing that I did want to go ahead and mention about Ultra Magnus, he literally has to kind of straddle the display stand, because where he plugs in is back here on this section you might see right there that forms part of the Omega crotch. So literally his leg is just kind of sitting like on both sides of it, like I said, straddling this display stand. So it is a little bit odd that Magnus has to do that, whereas Optimus, it's more of your standard, you know, plug on the backside. However, I'm just happy that they figured out a way to enable us to let Ultra Magnus look dynamic like we see here. So what's really kind of cool is that if you go ahead and put Ultra Magnus's brother on there, Optimus likewise looks pretty sick on his base. You have the twin sons of Cybertron just looking awesome like they are. Man, that just looks absolutely awesome with both these boys. So until you put these boys side by side, it's hard to mentally separate in your head. But once you do put them next to each other, the difference is night and day. I mean, the boy is crispy, he's white. I like the wide wings on this one. That's, you know, anybody that knows this channel knows that I love a winged figure. One thing that I did want to go ahead and point out is that on this old Ultra Magnus, much like the new one, the overall design of Ultra Magnus, even in cartoon, has always had a giant backpack. So the way that they solved him being able to carry that was, you can see that the sides of his trailer basically formed heel supports because he doesn't have any back here. Now these are the Omega Prime feet, and what they're doing is basically, they're just kind of filling out the leg. Now over here, these are what will become Omega Prime's feet when we combine them. You're actually utilizing them as the heel struts. It helps them to be a lot more stable. Now, obviously you might notice something that looks a little bit familiar in the back side of this Ultra Magnus's legs, that obviously being blue bolts. And how they basically utilize those pieces in order to fill out the backside of this guy's legs is pretty awesome. Now, that's not the only part of blue bolts that we see with this Ultra Magnus. And where they end up utilizing that last piece of blue bolts is an interesting place, and put blue bolts here on the bottom side of his head that then goes ahead and fills out his torso. Now, something you also might be clocking at this point is, oh my goodness, is that a matrix in Ultra Magnus's chest? Well, how did that get there? Did I place that there from the Optimus Prime that we were looking at earlier? No, because that matrix is right here in his battle armor chest. So they literally provide you with two matrices, which this one is also likewise removable. If you want to go ahead and pull it out of there, you definitely can. Now, the reason that there are two matrices is within the fiction, there is only one matrix. There was one time that Ultra Magnus accessed the power of the Matrix, even though Optimus is the one with the receptacle for it.
Leave them alone, Megatron! Huh? What's this?
What's happening to Ultra Magnus?
Where's all this extra energy coming from? What's happening here? Could we possibly be sharing the Matrix somehow?
Then, literally in the next episode...
I don't know about that. If you ask me, I think it's kind of refreshing. What's that glow?
The Matrix!
Now, as you can see here on the old Ultra Magnus, he does have this gun that basically it had to plug into these side supports, like the square ones for the machine gun, whereas he had circle ones for this like single laser cannon. And Ultra Magnus on the new version does have those ports, but they aren't meant to support his weapon like this, where it's just using one of the ends. Now, as amazing as Blue Bolts is, the only configuration that I got that was semi-close was basically like this, which, I mean, compared to the old one, I mean, there's obviously a great differential of how it looks. And every time that we see Ultra Magnus wielding his gun in the show, he never utilizes it with both barrels actually functioning. It's either in this configuration or with the machine gun end flipped around.
Oh yeah? Don't mess with me!
Oh, ow!
And so here's Ultra Magnus wielding it in machine gun configuration, which I do like how that looks. I think that's my favorite of the two weapon configurations. But you can kind of see here that basically these pieces mirror each other and they can connect there, but there's nowhere to put the center section on any side of that. However, it does sort of amuse me that they missed a key signature trick with the weapon. With him being able to dual wield, that is maybe a decent trade-off. As far as functionality, it's basically like a lateral move. So one other configuration for Blue Bolts on the back is right here, if you didn't want to have it like forward facing with the cannons and everything, because to be honest, this Ultra Magnus does have a really bad gap problem that you probably picked up on earlier. However, if you just wanted to store her like not in the legs or in the torso, basically, you can just go ahead and attach it right there. And then from the front, it's mostly pretty discreet. So our boy over here does share the ability to operate both cannons at the same time, and I have to say he does it a little bit better. Because over here on the old Ultra Magnus, if you see, he's literally not able to stare through the reticule on the top of his gun. He's looking at the back of his gun. It's like blocking his view of the enemy. And this is the lowest that the armatures plug into, because much like on the new one, basically you just plugged it into his armpits. And if you operate the armature, like the part that connects, if you flip them around, it actually makes it to where he starts staring underneath the gun. But at least the new one over here, like, he can actually stare through the reticule and target enemies. However, one of the updates that I appreciate on this newer figure is that you can take his 5mm peg on his thumb and plug it into the port that's on these red pieces right here. And he can do that dual wielding as well. I didn't have him doing that when we showed it earlier, but that is an option if you want it to be just that tad bit more secure. However, if you are just such a stickler that you have to have the original cannons on the side that they were originally, you can go ahead and pop these boys off. Pop them on right there and right there. And there you go. Now it's matching the original. And of course, before we head on with this video, I wanted to show you guys what both these guys in their standard robot modes look like. And I think, yeah, on the shelf, this is gonna look pretty awesome, to be honest. So I think that Optimus Prime's battle mode, this super mode, I have always kind of been leery about the ladder on his back. But even in the animation, they kind of turned it into a useful tool, and it never seemed to hinder this boy's ability. Matter of fact, whenever Optimus Prime was once operating at peak efficiency, he pretty easily handled the Combaticons on his own in battle mode.
Pulse cannon! Gyro strike!
And it kind of feels funny because this display stand, he is plugged into it, but it's kind of superfluous because, as you can see, his feet just basically reach the platform. So, I mean, the only thing that stand is doing is offering stability, which, I mean, this guy is stable enough on his own, especially since he has that giant ladder on his back. However, speaking about that cannon, here we can see it operating over his shoulder. And there are a couple instances of him using this in the show. I believe it's like the second episode, he ends up shooting Sky-Byte into space with his like water cannons. And then there's another time where the Decepticons and Predacons are down in this subterranean tunnel in the Arctic, and he actually encases them in ice by shooting water down the tunnel. So here we can see the current and former Optimus Primes, and you guys know that I love modern articulation for things like photography, and this Optimus Prime in super mode is killing it. Now, like I mentioned in base mode, you can see that he does have his compression pistol on his shoulder. Again, that's not a thing you can do for the new one, but the compression pistol actually just kind of plugs in right there on his back piece. So that's kind of nice that at least they don't have you just sitting it off to the side. And so here we can see the boys with their ladder restored to proper position, standing side by side. And you can definitely see where some of the stuff has been beefed up quite a bit. And like I said earlier, while I don't like the fact that the hips are so wide in his standard robot mode, as you can see here with the battle armor and this part being a lot beefier than on the original, that does help fill it out. Do I like the fact that it looks beefier? Yes. Am I crazy about these tabs on the side? Not really. That kind of ruins the look a little bit. But the one thing that I did like is that on the original, this is where his matrix was originally. You have the small little like reticule design right here in the molding. Well, on the big boy, they went ahead and kept that. That's where the matrix is on this with that compartment and everything. So I do love this like pseudo bandolier design that he has going on. That's really cool. And the fact that the matrix is in the part that like is really predominant with the chrome Autobot symbol, that's a cool little detail that they've kept. Now on the original, one thing you can notice is that when you add the super mode arms to the robot, the old like robot mode fist was visible, and I mean from certain angles it's apparent what it's doing. There's just basically kind of just a faux handpiece covering it. Well, they didn't really do a ton to innovate on that design, because if you look over here, you can see that it's the same sort of thing going on, but like you just saw, they did add this flap to some degree, kind of hide it a little bit. And over here, just due to the way it's designed, instead of it being like a bottom flap that comes up, it's a top one, but it basically is trying to serve the same function essentially. So small attention to detail that I like. And like as far as the aesthetics go, it's hard to kind of see on camera, but both of these boys have the orange foil over the robot mode eyes. We'll kind of bring him in here to maybe where you can kind of see that a little bit. And also, in addition to like the silver antennae and stuff, it's unique among Optimus Primes, because I don't think we've ever seen another Optimus rocking it with this specific head design. It's very unique in its own standing. Yeah, I mean, Super Mode is one of those things that I would like to display him in, but I don't know if I will, because anybody that's in the collecting game knows that shelf space can be at a very, very high premium with these guys. So without any further delay, everyone, why don't we go ahead and move on to what is the signature feature of this set. That being our boys combined together to make none other than the legendary Autobot warrior, Omega Prime. And does our boy not look absolutely sick? I am totally digging this. I'm loving the wide wing set on this boy. The sculpting on the head is amazing. The chest, it being all shiny and chrome, and just the massive scale of this boy. And just like we looked at earlier, you can see the bits of the Optimus Prime hips that with this flap being kind of folded down where it is. Again, that along with the thicker lower legs does help fill out the bottom half of Omega Prime a little bit better. Now, that being said, does the old one kind of look a little bit anemic in that area? And when you kind of compare it, yeah, it does a little bit, because again, they gave the proportion to the Optimus Prime iteration, whereas when you stack these boys side by side, you can kind of see how things are filled out a little bit better. Now, one detail on this guy that I do find funny, this panel right here is actually supposed to mimic the chest panel on Ultra Magnus, which that's what this panel is on the old boy. And you can see that above that panel is actually what forms the hips of that Ultra Magnus. However, on this guy, you can definitely see that they've collapsed the details, and it's more of an aesthetic choice rather than an engineering one. Now, one thing that this old guy is notorious for is having a super thick chest that comes out pretty far. Well, on the new Omega Prime, it's a little bit more collapsed. If I kept his arm out of there, it's a little bit more collapsed, a little bit more cleaner. Now, on the old guy, the other thing about that huge chest was they actually had a panel that would come up and fill the gap that the Omega Prime head came out of. On the new guy, you don't have that. It is a little bit tighter of a chest, but there is no panel. He does have this giant gap right here that, I mean, from the front, you can't really tell it, but from certain higher angles, yeah, you can definitely tell that there's something missing there, which when I put him in his combine mode, I'm like, okay, am I missing something? You know, does it have a hidden panel like the original boy over there? And no, that's exactly the way he's supposed to be. However, again, look at what his chest armor, how shiny and chrome that is, the gold, the silvers, the blues. Oh man, it looks good on Ultra Magnus. However, being one of the big major focal points of this figure, it looks even better here. Now, that head sculpting, oh, I am so digging that. On the eyes, it's got a little bit of chrome blue. You've got the magnificent gold antenna. I have always liked Omega Prime's head shape. It has those key Optimus elements, but at the same time, it looks cool and distinct as Omega Prime. Now, Omega Prime is known for having quite a bit of weaponry. Sometimes he would have the cannon attached to either over his right shoulder or his left in some instances. Now with the figure, you can see that we've gone ahead and attached it over his right shoulder because it's reutilizing those connection points from Ultra Magnus. And I mean, the Haslab is doing the same thing over here. However, as we discussed, since the new Haslab can't form this combined weapon like we see over here, you can utilize the cannons of Blue Bolts independently. So if you wanted to have just one barrel to sort of mimic this, you could just leave one of them off. However, if we've already gone to this extent, why don't we go ahead and show you guys how he utilized his weapons in his debut episode. And indeed, we can see our guy unleashing his Omega Arsenal Blast. For what is his main armament, that is something that is really cool that it looks as awesome as it does. On the old guy, the wings were not so pronounced, and when you have that Omega Arsenal Blast set up on top, it kind of diminishes the wings even more. Whereas on this new guy, they made sure that that aesthetic does not get covered up. So he still looks really winged and awesome, and you can appreciate that detail without this drowning it out. However, one last thing I want to go ahead and point out before we move on is a feature that my friend and I were talking about. Because this is the official way that you set up Blue Bolts to sit on top. And we got to thinking, well, what if there was a different way to set her up in order to utilize that other character that comes with these three overall? So what if alternatively you have it this way, where the reticule is facing forward? Wouldn't it have been cool if they could have, like on the back of her head or somehow, focus on putting a Titan Master slot in? That way Cerebros could literally sit on top. And then that way you actually would have incorporated all four characters that come in this set, because he's sitting up here looking through the reticule like he's manning maybe the smaller guns or the big ones. However, I mean, even just like this, with him just kind of sitting up there precariously on top of Blue Bolt's head, I think it could work. However, I know one of the things that you guys come to this channel for, it's to see comparisons between figures. But here he is, obviously, with his arch enemy, Megatron. And even at this size, I don't think it's too bad, but most of the time they're squaring off against Megatron in his two-headed dragon mode. And here's how that scale works, just in case you were wondering. And you know, I mean, even in this one, it does make Megatron feel a little bit bigger, but still, like I said earlier, this guy needs a size upgrade. That would be pretty awesome to see what a modern take on this guy would be. However, this is not the only guy that Omega Prime beat up. And here he is with his other punching bag. And I mean, literally, in that debut episode, he is laying his fist into him, man. And, you know, like this size right here, you can't really consider it like a legit thing, because obviously the original Ruination mold is using Generation 1 figures, which are not going to be in scale to a Haslab guy. However, I think the Combiner Wars Baldigus is probably the closest you can get as of right now. We know that the new Bruticus is coming out, which inevitably Ruination will probably be a repaint of that. But, you know, for right now, that's probably your best bet to get as close as you can. Oh boy, you are not intimidating in the slightest, are you? Although, oddly enough, this kind of feels about the right scale. I don't think even his old figure could save him as far as size goes. Scourge, in that initial battle, he was useless. All he was basically there, like as far as the writing goes, is just to get kicked by Omega Prime, because he does nothing else useful during that fight. One kick and he's out of it. Matter of fact, he's having to lay on Megatron's back, escaping off the island, because like pretty much that did him in. Anyway, just in case you wondered how this Scourge looked or how that Scourge looked, there you go. And just because I know some people want to know the scale of how this guy works currently, here is Sky-Byte over here with some familiar faces. However, I mean, that's pretty much all the bad guys that we have to compare him with.
I know that laugh, but where's it coming from?
Not yet.
Oh, booting up cold?
That's my call.
Yet, when it comes to other Autobots, how does he look with them? So here in this picture, you guys can see how he looks with his regular posse. Here he is with his supercharged posse and a captured slapper. And here he is with the entire Autobot army, at least the ones I have, which pretty much excludes the spy changers.
But I'm even faster!
Now, never mind the Devastator version of Landfill over here. This is uniform and clean, so just disregard that Decepticon symbol. Now, with that being said, does he look good with his boys here? Yes, this is a really awesome look, and these Combiner guys are not going to be to scale with our Haslab dude. As much as I would want a rail racer one day, while Hasbro may not do it, Takara might, so there's still hope for that guy. Yeah, our boy gets this massively absurd sword, and look at how far I had to back out just to show you not only him, but the entirety of that sword. This thing is all kinds of ridiculous, to be honest, but I love it all the same. So one of the details that I want to go ahead and show you is how the sword itself actually attaches to Omega Prime's fist. It does have these notches on the other side. Well, within his fist, you can see that he has a couple of tabs that will slide into those notches or slots. Now, the blade itself actually says the classic Transformers phrase,
Till all are one!
Now, why does it say that? Because this is literally called the Matrix Blade. But you're like, well, how did Optimus get this Matrix Blade? Well, buckle up. After Galvatron sucked the energy out of Fortress Maximus, literally every kid in the world decided to send him positivity emails. And so through the plot convenience of positivity, apparently he just magically recovered his energy. Then he's like, yep, I don't need it. I'm going to send it to Omega Prime. In the English dub, when that energy gets sent from Fortress Maximus to him via the space bridge, it energizes the Matrix, and out of the Matrix comes this blade that we only see once ever. So I'm like, okay, sure. Now see, him holding it like this with two hands feels slightly less ridiculous, which, I mean, in the show, he had to use both hands to wield it because of its size and everything. But you know what, like this, I think it looks pretty cool. And no matter how good he looks, you know, thinking now, if he's wielding this, there's only one guy that he can square off against.
Do it! My name is Galvatron!
Who up until that point had been rocking this alternate mode and had been doing a pretty good job of beating him up. But once Omega Prime got the Matrix Blade, Galvatron basically said,
This battle has just begun! Galvatron robot mode!
Them fighting in the Earth's core, and I mean, just, that was kind of a nice, it was a quick, but it was a nice way to end it with the final fight between these two specifically. And here we can see the boys squaring off, and even though this Galvatron is very, very impressive, Omega pretty much dashed his blade. However, just like we saw with Megatron, because the molds are 1-to-1, there's no chance of him even having the opportunity to measure up to Prime. So again, yet another argument for this guy, because if we had the Generations upcycle of him, which, I mean, you would probably get it if you got Megatron. Look at how crispy and clean this boy looks in white. In my opinion, I like this deco better on this mold, because it just looks that good. And man, a guy can hope, can he? So one of the last things that I want to go ahead and explain is the global space bridge and the stand. That's why we can't see anything from his waist up. Now, if you can kind of see here, Optimus is resting on the display stand, which this one right here is identical to the one he's on, so he is actually resting on this lower peg. Now, you can flip the stand around and add this little extension piece which can go ahead and give him one higher up. But even if you have him resting on this one, his feet just barely hover above the global space bridge. And at that point, if you don't balance his feet on both sides of the edge of the bridge, he just kind of tilts one way or the other, and it's really not that impressive. So I just found it was better to have the stand facing this way with him resting on this peg, because that way his feet are actually touching the bridge, and it just looks really good overall. So again, we've backed out here just so that you could see Optimus with the entirety of the space bridge stand. However, with that being said, if you wanted to go ahead and put some of these boys to kind of help fill out that space, instead of it just being solely Omega Prime, then you know what, it would look pretty good that way too. However, as we saw earlier, you don't need the display stand. This guy, even with something as heavy as the Matrix Blade, can stand on his own independent of it. And how could we head towards the end of this video and not show you the ultimate armor mode of Omega Prime? Now, one of the things that I do love is the fact that down here, like you can see with these, we've got the missile launchers on the legs, even have his little handgun over here. And then on the right hand side, we do have the giant fire ladder with all the missiles and the cannons. I mean, that just looks kind of cool right there. One thing that I'm really proud of is, if you can see over here, and a little bit better from the back, we went ahead and added not only his super mode hands, but also the shoulder armor to basically extend the wings. And the way that these are attached right now, that's the way that they are configured in fire truck mode. But again, from the front of it, it just looks like we've made the wings, like I said, even bigger and longer. So that's kind of a cool little effect. Plus, I like how the Autobot symbol, it is very evident from the front of it. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to show you what this looks like. And it actually is pretty stable, even though I'm not picking him up to show you. When they mentioned this on that live stream, that they gave him the ability to do this. I don't know if they've ever shown us the official way, but this is personally the way that I prefer to do it. So if we take a moment to dip into the lore, after the show ended, his fiction actually continued. So basically, he got pulled into the universe war and actually aided Optimus Primal in fighting the minions of Unicron. Well, as that reality was collapsing, he ended up getting pulled in a transwarp tunnel, not to his home reality, but actually that of the Unicron trilogy, and more specifically in the time frame of Cybertron. So while Optimus of that universe and his boys were all off getting the Cyber Planet keys, this version of Optimus and Magnus were defending the planet from Nemesis Prime and other Unicronian agents that were trying to destroy Cybertron. Once Optimus of the Cybertron series came back home, he met this Optimus and Magnus, and he actually thanks them for protecting Cybertron in his absence. And then on top of that, this boy has had other adventures that have continued over the last 20 years. The insane thing is this guy actually connected with his arch enemy, Galvatron from the series. He was able to hook up and form a giant claw.
Wow, how come we can't do that?
I don't know. I think they're double jointed.
Maybe they could teach us how to do it.
I was never a good student.
Come to think of it, I wouldn't want to fuse with you guys anyway.
And believe it or not, everybody, that pretty much wraps up this video. I really want to again reiterate my thanks in regards to your patience. I know it took forever to get this video out. However, like whenever I announced him as the winner of that very last poll that we did, this was going to be a time-intensive video, and while I've had to turn my attention to a few more important things, you know, life matters, I wanted to make sure that I kept my promise to you guys and got this video out to you. So just final thoughts on Omega Prime. Is he going to be my figure of the year? Well, right now I can't give you a solid answer. You know, the figure of the year isn't always the most impressive one. It can be from time to time, and it has. But Omega Prime, do I enjoy messing with him? Yeah, I mean, obviously. Am I terrified to transform Optimus most of the time? Absolutely. You know, and that kind of works against him a little bit. And sometimes whenever a transformer gets so complex, that kind of takes the fun out of it. And again, don't get me wrong, like I said, it looks amazing. And one last thing before we go, guys, is I'm kind of interested to know, the last couple years we've done the top 6 picks of the summer, which basically a best of haul video for the first half of the year. Do you guys want me to do that sort of video? We might do a poll asking you guys at some point later on, asking if you want a, top 6 summer picks video, which if not, it ain't gonna hurt my feelings. That's one less thing on my plate. But if you guys do want that, we'll leave it for you guys to decide. So with that being said, again, guys, I hope you enjoyed this look at Omega Prime along with Blue Bolts and Cerebros. And until next time, everybody, we will see you in another review.